I just remember the entire time, the entire team on the Morgan Stanley side, we were just watching our stock price fall. we were just afraid that there was going to be an announcement in the middle of this drafting session.
I'm your host, Sam Shaw, and today I'm excited to welcome my friend Zach Kinlock to the show. Zach started his career in investment banking at Morgan Stanley, where he spent his summer internship in the oil and gas group down in Houston. And from there, he moved into private equity at TPG Growth, working on growth equity investments and buyouts. But Zach didn't stop there. He made the bold pivot into tech, taking on leadership roles in growth and data science at companies like LinkedIn, DoorDash, and Facebook, where he became an expert in scaling consumer businesses. Today, Zach is the co-founder of Darwin Homes, where he's building a better rental experience by using technology to deliver a smoother, more efficient process for both landlords and tenants. You have a unique background for someone who ended up in banking because you studied petroleum and energy resources engineering at Stanford.
Yep.
Which I've actually never even heard of that major before. It seems like at that point, you were kind of headed for a very different career, probably something energy related. What ultimately made you then pivot into finance or investment banking?
Yeah, so when I was there, I think one of the key learnings I had, and he was a mentor, one of the founders of the company, said if you want to be in leadership in one of these companies, understanding the economic side of the equation is super important. Try an internship in oil and gas next year and see if that's more interesting to you. Ultimately, that advice is what pushed me in that direction.
How was your Wall Street background, whether it's hard skills or soft skills that you gained? How has that given you an edge as a founder now?
I think developing a hybrid set of skills really allows you as a founder, as a leader within any company, to be able to have like the breadth of knowledge to jump into any conversation.
Welcome to another episode of Wall Street Diaries, a podcast about extraordinary individuals who launched their careers on Wall Street and use that experience as a springboard to build world-class careers. We bring you the stories of people who turned that foundation into something remarkable. I'm your host, Sam Shaw, and today I'm excited to welcome my friend Zach Kinlock to the show. Zach started his career in investment banking at Morgan Stanley, where he spent his summer internship in the oil and gas group down in Houston. And after graduating from Stanford, he transitioned into Morgan Stanley's technology investment banking group, advising major communications, internet, solar, and engineering IT defense companies on financings and M&A deals. And from there, he moved into private equity at TPG Growth, working on growth equity investments and buyouts. But Zach didn't stop there. He made the bold pivot into tech, taking on leadership roles in growth and data science at companies like LinkedIn, DoorDash, and Facebook, where he became an expert in scaling consumer businesses. Today, Zach is the co-founder of Darwin Homes, where he's building a better rental experience by using technology to deliver a smoother, more efficient process for both landlords and tenants. And I'm excited to dive into his journey, how he navigated each transition, what he learned along the way, and how he leveraged his Wall Street foundation to build something of his own. With that said, Zach, welcome to the show, my friend. It's been way too long since we caught up, and I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to speak with us today, man.
For sure, Sam. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invite and excited to share some learnings that I've had along the way.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've been having a lot of fun doing these, catching up with all my friends, and so let's just dive right into it.
Sounds good.
Let's start from the very beginning. So, like I said, I feel like you have a unique background for someone who ended up in banking because you studied, I think it's petroleum and energy resources engineering at Stanford.
Yep.
Which I've actually never even heard of that major before. You interned at, I think, a company called Brightburn Energy during your sophomore summer, right? So
Yep.
It seems like at that point, you were kind of headed for a very different career, probably something energy related. And so I guess what initially drew you to energy, like what made you want to study that in college and also, pick that career, and what ultimately made you then pivot into finance or investment banking?
For sure. It's always easy looking back to create a story and a narrative about how this all makes sense. But, when I was in school, the first couple of years at Stanford, you have, I think, 1 or 2 years before you have to declare your major. So I was dabbling in a bunch of different, I was looking at management science and engineering. Maybe you've heard that one. It's kind of like industrial engineering.
Yeah.
Yes, a number of different majors. And funny enough, I stumbled into this engineering economics course, I think sophomore year in college. It ended up being, it fulfilled a requirement that was like a general requirement across the board. But it ended up being in the energy resources engineering department, which is also called petroleum engineering. They kind of rebranded it to expand into renewables. And it was a fascinating class that took into account the economics of energy production and oil extraction. And so it really opened up the world in my eyes to this very complex set of different forces that drove whether or not you could actually extract oil economically from the ground or generate or build a solar field economically as well. And so when I started understanding how the economics of oil production, energy production could really dictate whether or not you should greenlight a project or not, or the net present value of kind of like an oil investment or of a project, I think it really started opening my eyes to like, hey, this is an opportunity or this is a field that can kind of leverage multiple disciplines, economics, geology, engineering, and really bring it all together. And so the applied nature of these concepts where, it wasn't just math, it wasn't just engineering, it wasn't just geology, but in a real world type of industry was really fascinating. And so I actually ended up pursuing getting my degree in petroleum engineering. I was the first undergrad in about 15 years. It's mainly a graduate program where a lot of country or states, it's kind of like China, Nigeria, they actually get all their graduates to come to Stanford to get their training so they can help, develop the infrastructure in each of their respective countries for oil production. So I was surrounded by a bunch of grad students. I think it's become a slightly more popular major now, but, I think it was like since 1985, there was no undergrad that had actually gone through that program. So it was just out of pure interest. And it was like this hybrid set of skills that were required to get through the program. And it really leveraged a bunch of different disciplines that I'd never had really thought about beforehand.
So did you have to like apply to be in because if you're the only undergrad in this program, is that because they don't usually accept undergrads and you had to do something special to get in, or
no? It was for whatever reason, it was not. They didn't really market this department that much to undergrads. Like I said, I think oil energy production was not that popular. It's, being in California. Funny enough, like Chevron actually has a very large, their headquarters is in San Ramon, California. A lot of the grads would go there, but I think because it was in California, it's Stanford, it's the Bay Area. Everyone was focused more on renewables and other types of energy production versus oil. And so it was just not a very popular major for undergrads to go into. I think there was one other person who was an undergrad at the time that was considering it. He later became a grad student in the program, but it was mainly a graduate specific program.
Okay. And then you do the sophomore summer internship at Brightburn. What is that, I guess?
So at Brightburn, one of the grads of the Stanford Petroleum Engineering program, he actually founded this oil company based in LA. And he was speaking at one of the classes one day. I asked him, hey, do you have any summer internship opportunities? He said, yeah, it never hurts to ask when people come in, especially when they're alumni of the program. And they were effectively like a startup exploration and production company based in LA, where they were buying old wells that were effectively nearing their end of life, and they were finding ways to extract more out in a very economic way. So it was a very, really be on the ground, go to visit all the various oil wells and oil production sites in LA County and do really learn how energy, is really extracted from the ground. And so it was a great internship, 3 months in LA, and really understood what it meant to be a reservoir engineer.
Yeah. So that was more of an engineering type role then?
Correct.
Okay, it wasn't like a finance role. Okay. So then how did you pivot from that then to the following summer doing like oil and gas banking, I guess? At what point did you decide actually I'm going to not be an engineer, I'm going to go do this?
Yeah. So when I was there, I think one of the key learnings I had, and he was a mentor, one of the founders of the company, basically said, when it comes to oil production and reviewing projects to engage in, you really have to understand the economics of the well, right? And how long that the production cycles are, the depletion rates, really understand, what is the forecasted oil price over the next couple of years. And so in so many ways, even if you're really good at the engineering, you really have to be understanding of the economics of oil, right? Of these production sites. And so he basically said, hey, if you want to be in leadership in one of these companies, understanding the economic side of the equation is super important. Try an internship in oil and gas, next year and see if that's more interesting to you. So that's, ultimately that advice is what pushed me in that direction.
So you actually went into oil and gas banking more so with the intention of coming back into energy.
Yeah.
But obviously you ended up staying in banking. And not only that, you pivoted to tech banking, which is totally different. So talk about that, I guess. I mean, obviously going to Stanford, you're surrounded by people who are probably more interested in tech.
Correct.
Was that part of the influence, or Why did you make
It,
that switch after,
it,
after the
it
summer?
was. So I remember in 2007 when I was doing my internship in Houston. So just like a little bit more detail there. Had a great experience with Morgan Stanley Houston.
Yeah,
That's their primary energy office where
yeah,
all the deals are really done. You're really close to all your clients. And, in many ways, I had some more on the ground experience than some of the MDs or associates there just because they had really only cut their teeth in the finance world. They didn't really understand how oil was truly extracted from the ground. So I
yeah.
had great opportunities to actually meet with clients, and having that background really just gave me immediate credibility. But I
Mhm.
remember during that time, that was when there was a ton of investment going into green energy, solar, renewables, thermal, and whatnot. And I wanted to get more exposure to that. The Houston office was really focused on, I would say, traditional energy sources, and all the
Yeah,
renewable, solar, thermal, and whatnot. That was coming out of the Menlo Park office. And
yeah,
so, given the massive amounts of investments we were seeing, I think Kleiner was, opened up their green, Kleiner Perkins opened up a green fund and was doing quite considerable amount of investments in solar. I wanted to really be at the forefront of that wave versus being at the tail end or not necessarily the tail end, but, it was a very established industry being in oil. I wanted to get on the front end of a new investment wave. And so that's what really prompted me to consider renewables and green energy as a way for my career to go forward.
gotcha. You transition in tech banking more so with the intention of specializing in more like the renewable side of things, not in
Correct.
the traditional tech of like software, internet, et cetera, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I was always interested in that, right? But it was really about how do I leverage my energy background, understanding some of the challenges with oil, some of the, a lot of the fields around the world were hitting their peak production, and just knowing all the focus and the investments that were going into the renewable space. And
Yeah,
so, the Houston office just was not at the forefront of that. And, just because Menlo Park, a lot of the solar production or
yeah,
a lot of the companies that produce solar panels, they have semi backgrounds. And
yeah.
so a lot of that focus was based in Silicon Valley out of the Menlo Park office. And so naturally, I had a conversation with a number of people in the office, and it just made sense to get a full-time offer in the Menlo Park office.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think it's still that way today, where most of the Houston groups for all the various banks still focus on the more traditional energy industries, and then I think the Bay Area offices cover solar and other renewables. So that makes sense. So okay, I mean, one thing led to another. You end up in tech banking, MS Tech, obviously one of the top tech groups on Wall Street. It's also where you and I met. Obviously, we both know. I mean, we had just crazy deal flow, brutal work-life balance, I would say. What's like, I don't know, like the craziest story you have from your MS days? I'm sure you got
Uh,
multiple.
yeah, it was well when we joined banking in 2008, that was a crazy time just in general. The markets are crashing. I mean, we were in the middle of the GFC, the global financial crisis, and I just remember. So one of my first engagements in the office had to do with a private placement for a solar company that was out of Australia, and they had come into our office. We were drafting up some of the pitch books to go on a roadshow, and I just remember the entire time, the entire team on the Morgan Stanley side, we were just watching our stock price fall. We were just afraid that there was going to be an announcement in the middle of this drafting session that Morgan Stanley had been acquired or gone under. Bear Stearns and Lehman had just announcements a couple days or weeks prior, and so it was just a shocking time to be in this industry. And no one really knew what was happening. I remember around that time, all the second years were given offers to basically be terminated or to exit early, just because of the financial situation. So it was just a very unpredictable, volatile time to be in banking. But funny enough, about a year later, I helped take one of the first companies public on an equity roadshow. It was Fortinet. It was, I think, at the tail end of 2009. So I really had a lot of different experiences during my time there. During the most volatile times, there was not many deals going on. It was a lot of just pitching. But then
Yeah.
towards the end of my experience, we went on a roadshow, actually reopened the equity markets. It's one of the first IPOs that went out after it was kind of like the IPO window was closed for 12 to 18 months during 2008, 2009 times.
For that time vividly because I did my summer internship at Bear Stearns in the summer of 2007. So
Yeah.
that was like the last ever a summer class there. Obviously wasn't able to go back. I had no full time to go back to, and then ended up at DB, and then I think it was after the markets reopened, like you said, with the foreign IPO and et cetera, and then like deal flow started actually rebounding pretty quickly,
Yep.
and then MS decided to actually hire two laterals because you guys were so understaffed, and that's how I ended up going over to MS from DV. So yeah, those are some crazy times. I actually didn't even know that they offered. It sounded like they offered buyouts to. Was it the class above you, basically?
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So a number of those people took the packages and they left early just because they had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Wow. Why do they only offer that to the second years and not the first years? I guess because you guys just started, so
we're cheaper. We had just started, and yeah, they still needed to get some amount of work done, and it wasn't like things were completely closed down or frozen during that unpredictable time. The second years are more expensive. Some of them already had their private equity offers, and so it wasn't like the end of the world for them, so that they could have a graceful exit, basically reduce their payroll, and it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, that makes sense. So speaking of private equity, obviously you left MS, you went into private equity at TPG Growth, which is their growth equity arm, right? So how different was that? Because for a lot of the people in our audience, they're interested in working in banking and maybe eventually going to PE, but how different was that recruiting process compared to investment banking recruiting? And also, like, were you always targeting growth equity as kind of the exit op that you wanted, or was that kind of something you figured out later, just along the way?
Yeah. So great question. After my 2 years in tech banking, my coverage, the companies I covered, eBay, Skype, Fortinet, I was really exposed to a number of these like consumer tech companies. I saw the Tesla IPO, or we were involved in it tangentially. We saw Facebook. I really wanted to get closer to these like earlier stage companies. I didn't necessarily want to do like traditional buyout LBO, at a KKR or one of these like big bulge bracket private equity firms. And so I was actually looking at venture and then maybe earlier stage growth equity, maybe smaller stage, buyout firms. And so I talked to a number of these VC firms like NEA and whatnot. I think VC, they really pride people who have operating experience, who have done startups before, versus just, hey, you have 2 years of banking and now you're jumping in. And so when I saw that, I'm like, hey, longer term, I do really respect people who have actual operating experience and not just years and years of finance experience and doing modeling. To me, and this is going to be my bias, I like being in the trenches and being where the action is. And so if I wanted to be VC longer term in venture capital and help invest, whether it's angel or Series A through whatever stage of startup, getting operating experience was super, super important. And so what was the right way to achieve that? So I explored some VC opportunities. I explored growth equity. TPG Growth, I think, was effectively or very similar to the way that the TPG, the traditional like buyout group process looked like. It was modeling, a number of different interviews. There was like a super day in New York where we all flew in for all the final candidates, and you have to go through the process and talk to the partners. It was a very, very quick process. But there was, a number of different modeling LBO exercises that you would traditionally expect, along with you had to do a presentation to the group explaining your findings, your thoughts, and the strategy behind the acquisition or the buyout. But overall, growth equity, I just knew I wanted to be on the earlier side versus later stage investing.
So they still tested you on LBO modeling, even though you guys weren't really doing buyouts?
Correct. Growth equity at TPG, even though it says growth equity, it was still like mid-market buyout. As the company... as I was at TPG Growth, it became more and more of almost like a VC late stage investment firm, but it was very like mid-market buyout early on. And then it slowly pivoted more and more towards, investing in whether it was Airbnb or Uber in the later rounds, where they were kind of, hitching their wagon to these like hot, high-flying companies, just pure equity investments. And so it was definitely a hybrid group where, depending on the maturity of the company, they could leverage a lot of different strategies to get into the capital stack.
I feel like a lot of students out there, they're a lot more familiar with private equity, or at least they hear about private equity a lot more. They're not as familiar with growth equity. So for those who aren't super familiar, can you explain kind of the differences in terms of how they invest in growth versus in buyout? And I guess in your opinion, what are some of the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, I think so much of it is really where the stage of the company. Now, I'm talking generalities. In many instances, that's not the case. There's always exceptions to the rule. But in general, we were investing in earlier stage companies that were starting to approach cash flow, some amount of cash flow positivity. And you could put a moderate amount of debt on, but not that much. And so you do a hybrid investment. What I liked about it is that these were earlier stage companies where they had a higher growth trajectory. It wasn't just kind of like what I would say in traditional buyout. You're layering on a lot of debt. You're using cash flows, pay down the debt service, and to handle that. It was much more. You're still taking a bet on the growth, the market share gains potentially, the founders and the founding team. It wasn't just, hey, how do we do a lot of financial engineering to make this more profitable, increase cash flows, layer on debt, dividend recaps and whatnot. So it really forced you to get earlier to really understand the product, the KPIs that really drove the business, really partner with some of the founding teams or the executive teams, because in many instances, the founders are still involved. It wasn't many management teams later. So I think that's where it became closer to venture a little bit. It was like right in between traditional buyout and earlier stage investing. And so I had a lot of friends that were in the tech investment team at TPG. And yeah, they were looking at these like large multi-billion-dollar transactions going in at 50 to 250. That was kind of like our sweet spot. So it was just much smaller stage companies. Either they had a very small niche or they were just in the earlier stages of their growth trajectory.
Got it. And in growth, you guys are not like buying out the entire business. You guys are usually just buying like a minority stake and you get maybe one or two board seats, but you don't have full control. Is that right?
Yeah, it all depended on the situation. But yeah, if you're investing in Airbnb or Uber, you're not taking a majority stake. It was a minority stake just to get on. But for some of the smaller companies that we were involved in, we definitely took a majority. We helped reshape some of the executive management teams, really got into the guts of the business and helped shape the trajectory going forward. So it was very situation specific. And yeah, in certain instances, when the opportunity did present itself, the question is, does it go to like the main TPG group or to TPG growth? And there could be very specific conversations to determine like strategically where would it be a better fit and what would increase the chance of success long term.
Gotcha. So if you guys are doing that kind of deal, let's say it's like all equity, you're not using any leverage. I assume you guys are not doing LBO modeling at that point. What kind of modeling?
No, yeah, we would layer on some debt, whether it was from bank debt. There was always some element of that. It wasn't just pure equity investment into preferred or whatnot. And so there was it was always a hybrid. So having some trajectory to having cash flows, actual cash flows. This was not just like VC investing where you're banking on some future profitability. Now, when we bought into some, the profitability wasn't there or was misstated or it was not realized just because of industry volatility. But there was always some element of debt and debt servicing that we had to take into account.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So you then, after TPG, you made this pivot into business operations at LinkedIn, which I think that's actually I think they have kind of one of the best biz ops groups in tech. And I also see a lot of ex-bankers and PE guys go into biz ops more and more now. It seems to be kind of an increasingly popular exit. Can you explain what biz ops actually means and also like what drew you to that type of work?
Yeah, biz ops is it's one of those amorphous terms where it means something different at every single company. As you called out, biz ops at LinkedIn, I would say really established that team or at least that capability within, I would just say, tech companies within Silicon Valley. So Jeff Weiner, who was the CEO of LinkedIn at the time, really pushed the creation of this team or at least like really increased the visibility within LinkedIn. He previously worked at Yahoo, where a biz ops function was actually very important for the executive team to make very important strategic decisions. And the way it worked at LinkedIn is that the biz ops teams would have dedicated 1 to 2 to 3 people teams that would partner with various core functions or departments within the company, just say product or the sales team, and really help bridge the gap between these function specific teams and departments and like the finance team. And so to say product would have conversations or considerations around prioritization or impact. And we became the translation layer between the product team and the product roadmap and then the finance team that then needed to understand, if we make these investments over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, what does that actually mean in terms of our financial forecast? And so this is where, a lot of people with a background in finance, modeling, really understanding the operation side of the business could then translate that into the financial metrics or the financial outputs. So to give you a specific example, I worked on the consumer product, whatever, when you log into LinkedIn.com, all those various web pages, that was under my purview. And we had a number of different initiatives that would then lead to different impacts to page views, because page views ultimately led to ad inventory, and ad inventory, ultimately is how LinkedIn monetized a good portion of their site. And so we were always this translation layer between, if we do this initiative, we believe we're going to get this X% increase in page view traffic. And then as a result, this is what it's going to translate to in terms of dollars. And so the FP&A team, they needed to leverage us because they didn't have that in-depth understanding of how product would have an impact on engagement. And so we were this middle layer that helped translate between both financial priorities of the company as well as product priorities of the company. And because of that critical function, we had the ear of the head of product, Jeff Weiner. We had a weekly meeting where we would review numbers, metrics, forecasting, and it was a very, very high visibility role within the company.
Gotcha. So was the BizOps team, do they primarily hire like ex-bankers and things like that? Then
everyone on my team was ex-banking or a hedge fund. Funny enough, it was private equity hedge fund or investment banking. It was very consistent. The modeling aspect, we were running a massive model which effectively encapsulated every key section of the LinkedIn website so that we could have all the various levers to tweak to understand optimizing one aspect of the product. What would it translate to in terms of a financial impact?
Yeah. And then each, I guess, major business unit within LinkedIn would have a partner on the BizOps team who basically is responsible for, I guess, being kind of like the analytical horsepower for any strategic decisions that they have to make, basically.
That's right. It came up in a number of different ways. One is, yes, like the week to week, how are we performing? When there's weakness on some financial metric, understanding where it was derived from in the product was always like an investigation that we were involved in. But when it came to annual planning, where it was more of a tops down, here are our 3 or 4 key goals around revenue, user engagement, EBITDA, profitability. We would have to translate that into, so Jeff is expecting X% increase in revenue or X% increase in EBITDA this year. What do we need to do in terms of page view inventory or user growth that we have to drive for? And so, the product team doesn't understand financial metrics. And so we would always have to translate that directly to them and then give them metrics that were very tangible and understandable to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then I know when you were there, obviously, I think you started on the team as a senior associate, which is that pretty much just like the most junior title on the team, or is there?
Yeah, I think, look, we had a very small team. It was like 4 or 5 people that covered all of the consumer product team at LinkedIn. So it was a, I think a lot of people like to use the term that BizOps is like the SWAT team or SEAL Team 6. You come in, you really, really drive a lot of impact. So yes, I was the most junior person at the time when I started, but there were no other more junior people on the team.
Yeah. And then, but then you got promoted like twice in just your first 13 months, right? Which for those who haven't worked in like corporate yet, you don't typically get promoted twice in 13 months. Even if you get promoted once a year, I think that's considered like a lot, right? And so I guess I have to ask, like, what do you think was the key to your success, or for people that want to be on this faster trajectory or, this accelerated trajectory? Like, what do you think enables you to do that?
I think there's 2 things. And Sam, you probably have seen this at some of your prior experiences as well. So the first year I was there, I got promoted just because I jumped in. I was in charge of building and owning the forecast, the product ops forecast that was handed over to the finance team. And so there was a huge responsibility that was handed down to me. It was like I said, massive model, really in control of all the user forecasting, user metric forecasting, as well as page view metric forecasting for the entire company. So huge responsibility, took it on, worked with all the product teams across the board, really consolidated it all and delivered it over to the finance team for their consumption. How to get up to speed on understanding the product, understanding the metrics. I had to learn SQL, like Hadoop, and really get up to speed on my technical like querying capabilities because I had to retrieve all this data from the databases and be able to use that as a way to forecast and then be able to present that to the executive team on a regular basis. So that was like just nailing kind of the core capabilities and the expectations of the job. Now in tech, there's a lot of turnover, not necessarily because it's bad, but because people find other opportunities. There's new openings that open up. My manager at the time had a new opportunity where he was doing his own startup. He actually moved to Austin, where I'm at today, and I still talk to him very frequently. But he left, and so there was an opening at the top. Because I had only been there for about a year, people were like, is Zach ready? Is he ready to take on this responsibility where he's effectively advising the CEO and the head of product on a weekly basis about these decisions, strategic decisions, performance of the product and whatnot. And so there was a period of probably 4 to 6 weeks where I had to prove myself. We had these weekly engagement meetings with Jeff on Friday. Like I said, it was all the executive staff where I had to come in and present our performance. And it was a very, very scary meeting. If you were not prepared, Jeff knew all the numbers down to the T and did not have to like look up at any page. He had such a deep intuition about how the product worked. Whenever there was something slightly down, he'd be like, oh, I know there's something wrong with this, with this country. India's down way too much this year, even despite, holidays and whatnot. We would go look and we would not be surprised whenever there was a bug or something that was actually causing issues. And so being super prepared, being able to deliver good and bad news, having all the basically the team dialed in and our product manager partners also presenting successfully to the executive team. It was all about us having our numbers, but also making everyone else be prepared for those situations. Kind of rose to the occasion. And then at the end of that trial period, they said, hey, Zach's ready to step into that role. And I took advantage of that opportunity and really, that was the second promotion in a very short period of time. So I think you see this a lot in Silicon Valley where there's just a lot of movement, not only because the companies are growing, so new roles are created for the first time, but people do jump to lateral opportunities. They do their own startups. And that's how, Silicon Valley does have a really strong network. A lot of people have various different companies across the board in very senior positions, all starting in very junior positions in the team that you were at early on. And so I think that cannot be overstated. When there's a lot of movement within a general a company or industry, it does create a lot of upward mobility opportunities that are not necessarily expected when you first join the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the exciting things about working in Silicon Valley, because there's this culture where, and I see this at the places that I've worked at too, which is a lot of times it's not really about how old you are or how much tenure you have. And it's really just, they just want to know if who's the best. And
Correct.
If you're the best and you can create the most value for the business, then they will give you the opportunity to do that, because also everyone is very invested in the success of whatever business you're working for, right? And so I think that is, obviously awesome if you are actually good at your job.
Yes. You can get very exposed when you're not, right? I mean, it would have been bad if I was passed over. It would have been very challenging to continue on there just because it was not a vote of confidence, right?
Yeah. And I just found that it's very hard to hide, you can't, you will be given opportunities to kind of show, what you can do. And then either you are really, really good, or I think for most people, you're kind of average, or maybe you're not good. But what I found, especially in Charlotte, I guess this is true everywhere, but an A player is worth a lot more than a B player, right?
Yes.
It's not like a linear thing. It's exponential, basically. And so, I've worked at, when I was working at Square, Jason Lee, Jason Lee.
Yeah.
So he was also at TVG. It was the same thing. He was, one of the top performers, and he was also getting promoted super fast because he was just the best guy on the team. It was very obvious.
That's right.
I went in at a similar level. I mean, he joined before me, but we went in at the same title, and then he was getting promoted. I think I promoted 2 or 3 times just in the 1.5 year I was there. And then I was still at the same title, but I was yeah, Jason's better than me. That's legit.
When you realize that finance, and I think a lot of people in finance see this as well, it is a triangle, it's a pyramid where you can be an investor for a long time. You don't have to retire at the age of 50, 55. You have a lot of people that have to leave before you can get moved up. And there's very, very few slots, even if you are a top performer, to kind of move up to the next level. And it's a very, I guess, predictable path. You have to go to 2-year, typically business school. You have to move on to the next level. Other people have to leave to create headroom for you. Tech, that's not the case. There's just so much movement. and they are looking, like you said, for the best person for that role. And there's new roles that are getting created all the time. So, if you have the initiative and you have, the grit, you can move up very, very quickly in a lot of these like early stage or high growth tech companies.
Yeah. I guess back to that your point about it sounds like you were meeting with Jeff Weiner like weekly.
Yes.
Obviously he's super sharp dude. You can't really like sneak anything past him. That is like honestly a very high pressure. I'm just trying to imagine like putting myself in your shoes. Someone who's like relatively junior on the team. You're literally presenting to the CEO of a very, very large organization. So
it was public company at the time.
Yeah.
Pre-Microsoft acquisition.
Yeah. And so, like you said, like, there's a lot at stake, both for your own kind of standing within the business, but also just, it's very make or break in a sense, right? So how do you, obviously you ended up doing well in that situation, but like, how do you kind of like prepare for that? And how do you not fold under pressure, I guess?
It was one of the reasons why we hired, well, not only did we hire from ex-bankers, ex-hedge fund, ex-private equity, but we did a lot of like personality testing during the interview process. Not only I was put through the screen, but then just seeing how they could react to specific pressure situations. So for the BizOps team, I remember Walt, who's my mentor still, but the manager at the time. One of the exercises we put people through was a live SQL test. So we had to build a model from scratch, and in order to build a model, you had to get data from SQL. But no one knew, like I had no prior understanding or any experience with SQL. And so he's like, figure this out on your own. You have 45 minutes to do this. Use Google, do whatever you need to learn how to extract the data from the database. I want to see how you work under pressure. Wow. And so it was all around. So it was our interview was effectively pull data from LinkedIn's database, extract it, structure it in a way that made sense, and then use that as an input into a forecast model that you would build. And there was a lot of like idiosyncrasies about LinkedIn's business. There's a lot of seasonality, things that you would not really understand. And so understanding how to model that out and then reason through it was actually a big part of the interview test as well. But I think, being able to learn under pressure quickly, be self-sufficient and resourceful, those were key traits we were looking for during the interview process. And then on a weekly basis, it was just this cadence where Wednesday and Thursday is updating the model, looking at the numbers, and then being super dialed in. We had to send out the materials Thursday night so everyone could review. Friday morning at 9 a.m., that's when the meeting was for about an hour and a half. And it was just like a grilling session where he was just going through the numbers. Anything that deviated in any slight manner, year on year, month on month, week on week, we had to have answers for. And so that's where like you need to have that mentality on the team of people who've been in this environment beforehand. These are high stakes situations, and there's no time to say, hey, let me get back to you. We haven't had a chance. I don't really understand this. We had to have the answers before they were even asked, or before the questions were even asked. And I think when you do that and you show up to the meetings prepared, it basically means they don't need to be as concerned because they understand that this team is actually in control, monitoring, surveillance, driving a lot of this themselves without, Jeff Weiner always having to get involved and ask questions all the time. I think if he's asking a lot of questions, that means he's very concerned that the team is not actually doing their core job.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy that they made you do that during the interview process, because most people, you definitely don't use SQL in banking. And then in PE, I don't think you really use SQL either. So,
definitely not. So
like pretty much most, if not all, the people that are going through that process have never done it before.
Correct.
And you're saying 45 minutes to do on a spot, dude.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where the functions or the querying was simple. It was like a select star with like a where filter, but just having to go through that process and find help online yourself to be able to do that, I think it's just a great test of resourcefulness.
Yeah, there was no chat GPT back then, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been much easier at the time. And yeah, a lot of people would fold, 10, 15 minutes in, they wouldn't know how to get past like the next step. Obviously, we would help people along just so they could get to the modeling part. But it was definitely an A++, a very strong performance if they were able to get through the SQL part and do the modeling themselves.
Yeah. I think that's where it's like, yes, in banking, talk about like how much you learn, and you learn how to model. Yeah, you learn how to look at businesses. But I think a lot of it is also the soft skills of like learning how to work under pressure.
Yes.
And like having your managing director breathing down your back with super tight deadlines and
Correct.
for like many years, where just like anything else you do, like if you do it a lot, you become more accustomed to it, and then it's not as hard, right?
Correct.
And so I don't
Yes.
think,
Sometimes when you're in banking, you question like, why is there so much urgency? Why am I doing this? Like, what's the purpose of this? And then when
yeah,
you're in these real world I would say more real world, or you're actually within the guts of a company, helping and advising, you realize time is everything, and fast decisions really mean a lot to whether it's you're losing out on an opportunity, whether it's money or whatever it is, an investment decision. And so being able to move quickly, make 80-20 decisions based on the data is really important. So I think it all comes out in the wash eventually. Like you realize that the importance of making and having those skills developed early on.
absolutely. Okay, so then you leave LinkedIn and you go to DoorDash, right?
Yes.
And this is
Yes.
when DoorDash, I mean, DoorDash is humongous today, obviously, but back when you joined, it was still super early. I think they were only in 2 markets at the time. Was it Bay Area and what was the other market? I don't even know.
We were not even in San Francisco. San Francisco was not even a focus. It was effectively the peninsula in San Jose. And
Okay.
then we had just launched LA. So this was like a very early stage company. I think I was employee number 21, 22. And most of those employees were effectively, customer support early on. So it was a very small team focused on the Bay Area. It was like 3 or 4 people.
Okay. And so you were hired to kind of help them grow their Silicon Valley, or I guess the
Yes.
Peninsula market. And eventually that led to you starting the product growth team,
Correct.
which obviously then helped DoorDash become what it is today. I think last I checked, I mean, you guys have like 2/3 of the US food delivery market. So that's like pretty insane, honestly. And also, I think, I mean, back then I was at Square and we had Caviar, which I think is like, obviously in the same business, but much smaller. But I think at the time, if I remember correctly, most people expected Uber to win. And just like from the outside looking in, right? Like the people that are not actually working on it, it's just like, oh, Uber's like was the much bigger business and a lot more resources than all
Yep.
these things. So what do you think enabled you guys to beat out such a formidable competitor like Uber Eats?
Yeah, it's
Just you being really good at your job.
I know there's been things that have been like publicly shared or discussed. From my perspective, there's always like a cultural element and then like extreme focus. And then I would say we did engage in certain, I would say, tactics and strategies that Uber and Postmates did not do. So I can walk through it quickly. I think number one is extreme focus. Delivery, nailing delivery was our sole purpose and the reason for existence. I'm sure you've seen this at other companies, but when you have focus, especially in a large market, and that's all you care about, you can outmaneuver these much larger competitors that may have more resources. Uber's core business was still ride sharing, and Eats was just like a tactic to not only increase driver utilization on their side, it was a natural extension. It was a good adjacent vertical, but it was not their core purpose. Their core purpose was really ride sharing. So I think number one, they were exploring a number of different food delivery tactics. It wasn't just like pick up from restaurant, drop off. They were doing like the 15-minute deliveries where people were driving around with food in their trunks for a period of time. They were experimenting with a lot of different ways of doing things. But I think number one, focus. Number two is I think our early team was phenomenal. It's still an amazing team today. A lot of those people are still there, but really hungry people right out of college that were, a lot of them were ex-athletes, just like achievers in some other dimension. And this like tech ops play really they could leverage that to their advantage, where it was hustling on the ground, signing up restaurants, talking to merchants, recruiting dashers, getting them to pick up and drop off. A lot of the things require a lot of manual oversight early on in 24/7 monitoring, just because the tech wasn't there early on to automate everything away. And so it just required a lot of like persistence, grit. The launch teams in early cities were all like living in bunk beds, jumping around to various cities to launch them. So I think it was just, we had a phenomenal team that had like a lot of focus. Now, the third thing was, this is something I think that has been talked about in some other public situation or settings, but DoorDash, we knew early on that selection drove growth. And so having a larger amount of restaurants on our platform would attract more people. I mean, naturally, like, Sam, your favorite restaurants are different than mine, even if we're living in Palo Alto or Menlo Park or wherever it may be. And so a lot of restaurants early on, they were very uncomfortable with the restaurant delivery game. They didn't really trust the providers. They didn't know the nature of the food. Like, was it going to show up still packaged well, warm, and whatnot? And so early on, we did something called non-partnering, which is we put all the restaurants and their menus up on the DoorDash website, and we would just call up the restaurant and place the order as though we were a regular customer, go in, pay with a credit card, and walk out and deliver the food. And in that manner, we could actually get a much larger selection of restaurants on our platform than anyone else. Postmates and Uber Eats, they were not willing to do this non-partner concept as aggressively as we were. And so we kind of won on the selection game. At some point, we had like In-N-Out. We got a cease and desist from them just because they never agreed to having delivery, but it drove a ton of buzz and virality as a result. All the Stanford students were ordering. I think, we kind of flooded the restaurant within 15 minutes. I think we put Trader Joe's up on the website early on in LA, and that kind of flooded the website as well. And so we had all these like viral buzzy moments because we had these restaurants that had never offered delivery beforehand on our platform. And then the second component of that is when you had all these restaurants on our platform that were not on anyone else's, we had all this SEO juice where Google would index us as the only delivery provider for this restaurant. And so we got this very cheap top of the page real estate on Google. When someone searched for Tandoori Express or whatever restaurant it was that no one else delivered from, it would say DoorDash is the only delivery provider for this restaurant. And we would get a lot of free traffic that way. And so, a lot of these opportunities, there's like this arbitrage opportunity where, new real estate gets offered up by Google. It's not offered by, it's kind of flooded or saturated today. But when you had all the selection, there was no competition. We could kind of take and win the market in that manner. Just because, as I mentioned before, was our sole existence just to focus on delivery, offer as much selection as possible, and find different ways to get as much selection on, including non-partnering. And so those tactics really helped us outmaneuver some of our larger competitors at the time. Now, I think every restaurant's on every delivery platform now, but earlier on, that was a huge advantage to us as we were growing.
So non-partnering, to be clear, is like the customers place the order through you guys, and then you guys will go and place the order on their behalf and pay with your own, like the company credit card or whatever.
Correct. And we had a massive team in the offshore team, I think, Philippines, India, and whatnot, where orders would come in. They would then have a list of orders that they would have to claim, and then they would call up the restaurant themselves and place the order. One of the downsides of that, there was a higher rate of error just because it was done and placed via phone. But what we could do then is after 4 to 8 weeks, we could go to the restaurant and say, see, like DoorDash is delivering you a lot of volume and traffic and sales. We're going to shut you off now, or, just start paying us a commission and we can get an iPad installed. When you have the data and you can prove to them that they are generating incremental revenue through this new delivery platform, it was such an easy sale at that point. So it was just willingness to think outside the box, give them value without them even realizing it. And then at that point, it became such an easy upsell to become a partner. And that's how we ended up like opening up the market to a lot of new restaurants.
I feel like also, I've never worked at DoorDash. From the outside looking in, I get the sense that you guys are really willing to do things that weren't super scalable in the beginning.
Yes, that's right.
Sometimes you have to do things that are not scalable in the beginning before you can get to the point where you can do it in a scalable way. And so I think that's really cool. And then the other thing that your example kind of reminded me of, it's like, it's basically like it's like a growth hack, right? It's what they call growth hack in Silicon Valley. It's kind of like how Airbnb started out by posting on Craigslist all their listings, and that was kind of how they seeded the demand or whatever. This kind of reminds me of that, basically. So that's awesome. And I assume that this was like kind of something that you guys came up with on the growth team.
Yeah, it was partnership. Like the growth team, we worked very closely with all the local teams. And the local teams would have a lot of insights on the ground, whether it was the LA team or the Bay Area team or the Boston team and whatnot. And I think we quickly saw through the data that as we added some of these, there were certain restaurants that everyone wanted that were not on our platform. And we're like, how do we actually get that platform on DoorDash? Because if we did so, we would get a lot of, customers coming to our site. And so that's where we started experimenting with this insight. Now, what the growth team does is not only, use data to drive some of these cool experiments that were fun to test out, but it also really focused on product and helping drive conversion of, so yeah, you have this cool new restaurant on DoorDash. how do you get that customer to sign up as quickly as possible, to check out as quickly as possible, and to retain them? So it was a lot of data, marketing, and product all working together to experiment. And then when something worked, how do you scale that up across, the product and through across as many markets as possible?
Yeah. I'm curious on a more personal level because you went from LinkedIn, which is a humongous public company, where you also were doing very well at, and you were like regularly interacting with the CEO, to then going to DoorDash as like the 21st or 22nd employer or whatever it may be. At the time, like, nobody could have said for sure that DoorDash was going to become what it is today, right? Like, obviously, in hindsight, oh yeah, great decision at the time. But at the time, I think it was like, you could argue that you were taking a huge risk, right? And so what was kind of the decision making process there, and what made you decide to take that risk, and like how did you feel about it? I guess I mean, obviously you did it, so you must have thought it was a good decision.
At the time, I was living in Mountain View when I was working in LinkedIn. And I just remember seeing all these DoorDash, like red shirts running up and down Castro Street and University Ave. I'm like, something's happening. Like a week ago, there were not that many. And now I started seeing more. Like, what's going on with this company? This is pretty interesting. Saw the Sequoia investment. And, Sequoia is the 800-pound gorilla. They make the best investments. They have the best team. They see the best deal flow. And they had not made another delivery investment, even though there were other companies out there that were doing delivery. Postmates, for example. There was a company called Fluck, FLUC, based in Palo Alto as well, that had some traction, but they chose DoorDash. And so I thought, hey, maybe this is a company that was worth looking at. I started looking at their backgrounds, some of their early numbers, their experience. I tested it out and I loved it. And I started hearing more and more people using it at LinkedIn. And so at the time, I wanted to keep on getting closer and closer to the operations, or be in operations, or be in like the driver's seat, versus still, BizOps is still advising to a certain degree. You're connecting teams together. I wanted to be in making the decisions. I wanted to have my neck on the line. So, as you get into roles where there's more depending on you, you have more upside, right? Whether it's equity, whether it's compensation. And that's not the only thing that motivates me, but I like having my neck on the line, skin in the game. And so I thought, hey, seems like all the boxes are checked. They have validation from a great VC. I see the activity. I love the product experience. Why not? And funny enough, looking back, I don't know how many other people would have done this, but my manager at DoorDash was like straight out of college. So I was, 6 years of experience at that point. Wow. And he was a 23-year-old college grad, no prior managerial experience. And it's one of those things when you see, you meet the team, incredibly smart, incredibly passionate, hustlers. You just want to jump on, the rocket ship and just get a seat on. And everyone was like towing in, marching in the same direction. It was just an exciting team to be a part of. So it didn't matter about title and hierarchy and all that crap that a lot of people do care about. I'm like, I just want to be part of this team. Everyone's incredibly, intelligent. It doesn't really matter about prior work experience. Like, this is a brand new industry. No one has prior experience doing this anyway. So might as well just join and see what happens here.
Man, you're right. I don't think everyone would have done that, because especially I feel like people coming from banking, PE background, and you go to like even LinkedIn BizOps, very elite team, right? I think it's easy for someone with that type of pedigree to like have an ego about it.
Yes.
Or like I'm not going to report to this guy. Like, what does he know, right? And then, but that would have then prevented you from.
Talking to them later, like, they were shocked I took the offer. I think part of it was like, oh God, this is a guy coming from like LinkedIn, TPG, Morgan Stanley. Like, he's not going to get his hands dirty. These finance guys, and they just want to be in a model all day long, or they just want to tell people what to do. And so as a sign of good faith, I'm like, drop my salary as low as possible. I want to maximize equity. I think my salary for the first 2 years was like 75, 80K a year. I really took a massive hit just to join the team. And obviously they were a Series A company at the time. They didn't have that much cash to give. They weren't giving out massive pay packages. And so it worked out in the end. Like, I knew that worst case scenario, if DoorDash, like, in my mind, they would get acquired by some other company like Google. Worst case scenario, there would be still some silver lining there. A good experience. They had great backers. They had product market fit, kind of like asymmetric to the, upside opportunity, where I was willing to take the risk and bet. I think one of the advantages of being in banking and private equity is that you can take some of those larger risks, because, if you've saved up a little bit, you can jump into an earlier stage company, and that's where you can really establish your career, get a lot of equity upside, and win in that way. So I don't know. It just ended up working out well. I know luck plays a large part in this, but there's certain things you can do to kind of mitigate that or downplay that as much as possible.
No, I think that's freaking, dude. I mean, first of all, great trade. I don't know how much cash you have to trade for how much additional equity, but great trade. Yeah, no, it was similar when I didn't have the choice of trading cash for equity, I think, but when I left PE to go to Square, it was the same thing. Like my cash was a little bit higher than you. It was 90, right? But
Yep.
in PE, I was making 200. So going from
Yep.
200 to 90 still hurt.
Yep.
But I think they were more generous on the equity side. And then Square's equity obviously ended up doing really well too. And so like it was great in hindsight. But I think also like similar to you, like when I joined Square and sounds like when you joined DoorDash, you had done a lot of research on the company and you kind of put your investor's hat on and thought about it from like an investor's point of view.
Correct.
And you had a lot of conviction that this business was going to be worth a lot more someday than whatever it's worth today. Right. And so if you have that type of conviction, then the smart thing to do is to take more equity, because learning how to think as an investor, both from your banking days and PE days, like that's a really valuable skill, just like a life skill that you can use for the rest of your life. Not just for like buying stocks, but also for picking the right companies to work for. Like, who do you want to bet your career on? Because when you're betting on a company, as far as like an employer goes, you're not just putting in like your financial capital. You're actually putting in your time, which is actually the most valuable form of capital that because you never get that back, right? You might give this company, I don't know, how long were you at DoorDash? Like 6 years, 4 years? I don't remember.
It was right around there. Yep.
It was like a long time, right? And so like you never get that back, right? And I also know people. I have a friend who like worked at a startup for like 7 years, and then the equity ended up being worth zero, right? And so it's like, that is like a terrible outcome and a terrible feeling, because you're like, I've just been working for this like below market salary for the last 7 years, and I have nothing to show for it.
Yeah. You have to be very intentional. Luckily that cohort of startups or companies in Square, there was the entire mobile, the shift to mobile, kind of like the local gig economy, mobile set of opportunities, Instacart, all the delivery apps. Most of them, even if it was considered a bad outcome, was still a good outcome. There was really no like massive loser in the space. And that's what you get when you ride some of these massive like tailwinds, is that you are a winner. It's just like, it's a degree of how big of a winner you are, but everyone wins. And I think that's what's going to be happening with this AI wave over the next couple of years, where you have this massive, new set of capabilities and tools and products that are coming out. But you kind of just want to jump on when you start seeing it. And then ideally you choose the best of breed, right? And so the Sequoia, them underwriting DoorDash was big. I loved the team. Most of the engineers are all ex-Stanford, coming right out of Stanford. They were all recruiting their friends from like the CS department. So it was like really, really strong talent pool, talent density, and everyone was like working their ass off. So I just love the culture, the team. And of course you got the external validation from the best in breed, VCs coming in.
Yeah. The team is probably the most important thing, especially for a startup, right? So
that's right.
That's makes a lot of sense. Okay. So then you go to DoorDash, crush it there, throw the shit out of it. And then you leave and you go to not LinkedIn, go to Facebook. And so now I feel like you're going the opposite direction, because you went from a big company to a super early startup, and then now you go back to an even bigger company than LinkedIn, right? And then now at LinkedIn you're leading data science, I think, which is kind of a slightly different team, right?
It is. So at Facebook Meta now, data science was effectively their biz ops in a way. They don't have a biz ops team. Data science kind of encompasses some of the biz ops responsibilities. But one of the things that I've seen, and at DoorDash, I had a good run. We were, still growing aggressively at the time. I had learned a lot of skills around growth. I had a lot of mentors, Casey Winters. I was attending a lot of the conferences and meetups and whatnot. But I never felt like I really understood like what good looked like in the industry. And I always want to establish what the gold standard is. Like that's where working at the best companies helps you establish and understand, is like, what is the gold standard when it comes to banking, when it comes to private equity, when it comes to biz ops, when it comes to growth. I had come up with a lot of like hacky things myself that were working. Now, I think in many ways, growth was still a nascent kind of discipline at the time. It was still, getting developed. But the growth team at Facebook, world renowned, obviously everyone knows Chamath and the All In podcast, but he had really established the growth team and the growth discipline there. And so wanted to see what good looked like and just take what I had learned at DoorDash and then understood what does it look like at a global scale for billions and billions of people. And so to me, it's just like helps me codify my learnings, understand what I learned or developed at DoorDash that was actually applicable and it was good, and what are some maybe bad habits that I learned along the way that were not so good, maybe around data analysis or experimentation and product development. And so I felt like I had tapped out of some of my learnings at DoorDash. At that point, it became just more around managing a team, growing the team, entering new markets. Obviously, if I stayed on longer, it would have been a better outcome, more equity. But I still felt like I was very early in my career, still optimizing for learning, and felt like going to Facebook on the growth team would really help me understand what good looks like at a massive global scale. And so to me, and this is just me, I don't know how many of my other friends do this, but I always really optimize for learning. And as long as I'm learning and I feel like I'm really developing a skill set and getting deep in something, then I can provide a lot of value back to the company. And then it's a win-win on both sides. And so, that was the primary motivator around going to the Facebook growth team.
That is so good, man. I actually didn't connect the dots that way until you said it, which is like, all the teams that you've been on were kind of like known for being best in class at whatever it is they do, right? It's like MS Tech, like TPG Growth, like, LinkedIn Biz Ops and, Facebook. And so that makes a ton of sense. And you already answered. I was going to ask you, like, so do you just like always put learning as like the most important criteria when you're looking for a job? Sounds like you do. Because I think like, people can optimize for different things. You can optimize for compensation. You can optimize for work-life balance. You can optimize for learning, whatever you want. I do think that optimizing for learning, like, because developing yourself and getting like, more skills, that's like the one thing that people can't take away from you. And you just continue to make yourself more and more valuable. And then in a way, you're kind of, you might not be getting paid the most, but you're kind of also playing the long game too, because
that's right.
The skill sets that you learn kind of compound, right? Over time.
That's right. And that's how I'm willing to, that's how I'm able to get into the mental state to say, hey, I'm willing to report to a 23-year-old new college grad. I'm going into a space and an opportunity where I will be learning a lot new skills, getting exposed to a lot new experiences. And so that's kind of how I've always thought about opportunities, is where will I be engaged the most excited about? And to me, what really gives me energy is learning, getting exposed to new sets of experiences that I've never had before. And so, but part of it is why like I stay at places like 2 to 3 years is because like at a certain point it does become a little bit stale. And it would probably serve me better to stay in places, prior to Darwin for longer. But I think early in your career, you have to optimize for learning, because at a certain point, when you start settling down into a certain career or trajectory, those skill sets and experiences you've amassed over the past 10 to 15 years really do play a critical role. And it's one of the reasons why I think I'm very high impact successful now, is because I've done finance, I've done operations, I've done growth, I've done product, I've done data. There's really very few people out there that have that breadth of experience across so many different disciplines.
Yeah. I will say, like, from personal experience too, I don't think I was as deliberate as you were about just trying to like optimize for learning at every stop along the way before. But it wasn't until after I became a business owner, where once you become a business owner, you don't really have a choice. You're constantly having to learn new things. And there were so many things I just like didn't know how to do, right? Like all of a sudden I have to learn how to do sales. I have to learn how to do marketing. I have to learn how to do product. I have to learn, like, I was just a finance guy, right? And but like in a way, that's also what makes it so much more interesting, because like my job it never gets stale. To your point, like prior to running my own business, I had never been at a job for probably more than 2 years, I want to say. And now it's like every day there's a new challenge. And then as the business grows, new challenges pop up. It's kind of like a video game. You beat a level and then you go to the next level, and the next level gets harder and you die like 100 times before you get to that level. Yeah. And that's like actually been really, really fun. And then also like now I enjoy learning. And then I'm like when I'm on like YouTube and stuff, I'm watching videos to like learn. I'm not like, for the most part, not really watching for like entertainment. And I think it's just a different mindset.
It is. The other thing that I just remember at the time, and you mentioned some friends who worked at startups 5-7 years. No real big like pay, not from a monetary standpoint, but even from I think one of the biggest challenges is that if you're at a startup that does not succeed, and DoorDash was not guaranteed at the time that when I left, you both you suffer both from a monetary standpoint, but from a reputation standpoint. All right, you may have learned skills, but from an external perspective, people don't know how to judge that experience. Yeah. And when I was outside of DoorDash, I had gone to Facebook, no one really cared about DoorDash was not big at the time, or that big. It was not that scaled. And they're like, I don't know how to really assess the growth team you've built, the skills you've developed. Is it good or bad? Can't really tell. And so in some ways, by going to Facebook, it kind of legitimizes what I had done previously, knowing that I was able to get recruited and a recruiter reached out to me, got through the process super fast, put into a senior position there. It kind of says everything I had done was legit. And even if DoorDash was a failure or didn't succeed, I could then leverage the Facebook experience as kind of a proof point that, hey, I was legit in the growth, in growth and kind of the discipline I had established there. I think there's there was a good blog post, maybe Andreessen put it out there a couple of years ago, where jumping between big and small companies, there's advantages of that in your career, where you can experiment, you can be creative in these smaller startups, especially if they don't turn out to be something big. Going to a larger company, operating at scale, managing teams, kind of legitimizing your prior experiences is just as important for your career development as well.
No, that is such a good point because, I always tell people it's not really fair, but people just use the success of the companies you work for as kind of like a proxy for, how successful you are, right? And it's I would say oh yeah, I work for GitHub. GitHub would have been very successful with or without me, but because I work there, people assume I have something to do with the success, right? And then I also worked for a startup afterwards, Enjoy Technology, which now no longer exists. Same thing, the business model is flawed, and regardless of what I did or didn't do, that business was not going to stick around, right? And so a lot of times, honestly, obviously we still all contribute to the success of the business, but a lot of times it doesn't really have that much to do with you, I feel like.
That's right. But
nonetheless, it's still that halo effect of having Facebook or Goldman Sachs or whatever, TPG on your resume, people still use that to judge you. So for whatever it's worth, it does still kind of matter, right? That's why prestige matters, actually.
It does. And as much people want to say credentials don't matter, once you start talking to a person, if they know a subject matter and they have skill sets that are very, you can test, you can verify and whatnot, credentials actually don't matter. But getting into the door, getting into the meeting room, it's actually paid dividends. I know we're going to talk about Darwin soon, but having credentials, especially in a more traditional space, actually really, really matters. And it gives you immediate respect. Whether it's deserved or not, that's proved out over time, but it gets you into the door and into the meeting room.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Darwin on that note. You do all of these, startups and tech companies. Eventually, you decide to start your own company, which is called Darwin Homes. For those who aren't familiar, can you explain what Darwin does? And also, what was the spark or the moment that made you say hey, I need to build this thing?
Yeah. So Ryan Broderick, who's the co-founder CEO of Darwin, we met in the early days of DoorDash. He was the head of the sales team and the launch team. So we had worked together for many years, just mutual respect, loved working with one another. He was kind of the forward deployed team, and I was in HQ. And we were always supporting each other in terms of getting a market up to speed. So we had actually co-invested in a couple of single family rentals just to diversify our investments. We were obviously very heavy in terms of our tech exposure, being at DoorDash and just being in Silicon Valley at a time. Pretty much all your net worth is tied up in illiquid equity or just the tech sector in general. And so we ended up buying a couple single family rentals, and that process, the pain it was to remotely manage tenants and properties in different states outside of California, just kind of opened up our eyes to an opportunity in the rental living space. So while at Facebook, we just started riffing on different opportunities. We wanted to get back into the game. I loved Facebook. I saw what good looked like. I did that for 2 years. I had an amazing time there. Went to India, saw people get onto the internet for the first time. But what I realized at Facebook is that the problems that Facebook had, no other company was going to have. They're at such crazy scale that the problems we were working on, which were very intellectually stimulating, were problems that were not going to be transferable to any other startup or company, probably for the rest of my lifetime, just because like everyone in the world was using this product. And so we started riffing on like, hey, what are some new like startup ideas that we could work on? That remote management of single family rentals was something that kind of was very personal to us. In addition, because we were just in the food sector, the only other wallet share that people spend more money on is where you live. And so we wanted to go after a bigger opportunity than food, which we had just felt like we had disrupted, we had revolutionized with DoorDash. We wanted to go after the bigger piece of the pie, which was living, whether it's buying a house or renting a house. And so we're like, hey, let's take the same DoorDash playbook and let's implement that and apply that to rental properties across the US. And that's how Darwin was born.
Interesting. So obviously you guys already worked together at DoorDash, knew each other really well. I guess you guys knew you were compatible from like a coworker standpoint, right?
Yep.
Was that basically just like what gave you guys confidence that you guys could work as co-founders?
Yeah.
Was it as simple as that? Okay.
The amount of long hours late in the office, DoorDash we love like these tech ops plays just because it's where product and internet and tech kind of intersect with the real world. Those are very, very hard businesses and they require long hours. And so the amount of hours we had to spend together, not only like Ryan and myself, but a lot of the early people at Darwin were ex-DoorDash. And so Rob King, Christian, who was our CTO, they were all ex-DoorDash people. And so we had worked just so many long hours together, partied together after work at DoorDash. We all knew each other very, very well. And so it was just a natural way of kind of saying, let's get the band back together and let's do something new.
Yeah. No, you're right. You guys did work like crazy because I lived with Rob for a few years and I never saw him.
Yeah, right.
I was like, dude, why are you like, what are you doing? Like, he's always at work. Actually, even when he was at home, he was still working. So I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
But okay, so I guess on that note though, like for people who maybe want to start their own business and they're looking for a co-founder, I mean, obviously it's a little bit different because you guys had already worked together, but like if you were to look for a co-founder from scratch, like are there specific traits that you think you should be looking for when you're picking a co-founder? Or maybe not traits because like everybody has different, so maybe you need different traits that will complement yourself. But like, is there an approach or like a framework to go about like picking the right when you're starting?
Tough. Yeah.
That's one of the most important decisions you can make, right? It's like, who are you going to marry, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many intangibles there. I think what makes Ryan and myself work so well together. I mean, look, we get into arguments all the time. We debate, but there's this foundation of respect that no matter what happens, we respect each other's because I think he's the best at what he does and I'm the best at what I do. And I think that's like what really ties us together. He's amazing at sales, at speaking, at just like getting, he just can light up a room, right? And I'm much more of the technical data analytics person. And so we complement each other very, very well, just in terms of our skill sets. And I think I think if you had co-founders that actually had a lot of overlapping skill sets, that's probably where you start getting a lot of like butting of heads and friction. But I feel very comfortable deferring to him when it comes to very specific situations, and he defers to me and others. And then when it comes to decisions that we need to agree on together, whether it's data, whether it's his perspective or my perspective, we always can come to a mutual decision where we both, align on it, agree upon it. And there's no like bad blood at all in any situation, even if it doesn't turn out in the most ideal way. And so I think in many ways, like this is like a match made in heaven. Like, it is another form of a marriage where you're stuck with this person, but not only it's codified through your incorporation docs and your cap table and whatnot, like you really are living and breathing and dying with this person on so many different ways through the life cycle of this company.
I mean, realistically, you probably spend more time with him than with your significant other. So
that's right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. You guys also raised a couple rounds of funding, right, from very reputable VC firms and angels, and you guys did like a 15 million Series A in 2021. For people who have never raised money before, what was that process like? And what's like something that you wish you had known beforehand?
Yeah, the VC process is funny. I think one of the challenges, and we've learned this now, is that, a lot of our network was established early on. We knew a lot of the DoorDash investors. They were all consumer focused investors. And we leveraged that network to get introductions to a lot of the VCs. Our product and what we were offering was more SaaS, more enterprise. It was less of the consumer play, even though there are renters involved. The people we had, the dynamics of property management and building a tech-enabled property management platform is much more SaaS-like. And so a lot of our early conversations, they were just not landing. We had, 5 to 10. We would get to the partner meetings. They loved talking about our DoorDash days and our experiences. A great time talking about that. And then you would get to the partner meeting and they're like, so are you the property manager? Are you building software? Are you doing operations? And it would just not land. And so we quickly realized we were talking to the wrong partners within the firm or the wrong firms completely. And so understanding there's a number of different levels, like who you're talking to is a partner, associate, whatnot. Where are they in their career? And are they willing to take a risk to vouch for this company within the investment committee? That's like one of the most important things. And then, of course, like where are they within their fund deployment cycle? Are they willing to take more risk versus less risk? And so one of our best investors, Khosla, David Wyden, super well respected at Khosla. If he vouches for a company, it will get through investment committee. Whereas if you're going to another firm that might be reputable, but you're dealing with a slightly more junior person, they may not have the credibility, the social capital in order to push something through, even if they're banging the table for it, or maybe they're not willing to do it because they don't have the conviction yet. And so understanding like who you're talking to, the fund, their thesis, the tailwinds that they're trying to, or like the waves that they're trying to ride, it really like there's so many things that have to line up for an investment to go through. So many layers of approval. That's why you have to have a lot of meetings, talk to a lot of people before you actually can round up a good set of partners to invest in you.
Yeah. How much control do you have over like who you reach at which firm? Like to your point, like the Khosla guy, obviously it's better if you can get him on board, but like how much control do you have over like who your touch points are? Or is it just like whoever you happen to be introduced to by your network, and that's kind of who you get to talk to?
Sometimes you don't have that much control. So we got introduced to David Wyden at Khosla through Keith Raboy. So we knew Keith Raboy through DoorDash. We pitched to him. He's like, this is not my area exactly, or I don't find this to be something that I'm super excited about. But David Wyden, he's our real estate prop tech guy at Khosla. Let me refer him to you, or let me refer you guys to him. And so that's how it happened. So in many instances, you have to take the initial meeting with your network contact, and then get introduced to the other person who's more appropriate at the firm. So that happened multiple times. It just takes time to go through those.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and so I also read a quote from one of your Series A investors when I was just doing research for this interview, and he said that he backed you guys because he saw how you guys competed while I guess he used to be the CEO or president of DoorDash's competitor. I think it was maybe for Yelp. It was E24.
Yeah, correct.
So I guess he competed with you guys. He must have hated competing with you guys, I guess. And he said like, you guys were the type to like roll up your sleeves and grind through like a very operationally intensive business.
That's right.
DoorDash was, and I imagine Darwin also is because you guys are doing property management essentially, right? What is it like? So talk about like what is it like to build companies where operations are so demanding? I guess is that like, would you say that's because I feel like different types of businesses, there's like always like the one big thing that is what your business is really about, right? Like for some businesses, like this is really about like building a really good sales team. And for some businesses, like you got to be really good at marketing. And for some businesses, like you have to be really good at operations. Because like if your operation sucks, like you don't have a product and it's not going to work, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the key learnings that we had at DoorDash, tech ops business, is that doing the job yourself helps you understand that problem so you can build better products and solutions for that problem that you've experienced firsthand. It's not, you're not talking to people. You're not just doing user interviews. You're actually picking up the food, talking to merchants and dropping it off. It's one of the reasons why Ryan and I, we moved to Austin. We wanted to be close to where operations would be. Austin still is kind of like the prop tech capital of the US. It's, we were evaluating Phoenix, Austin, and Atlanta just because that's where there's a lot of single family rentals. It's in the Sun Belt. And that's where we could get a lot of our first clients and customers. We wanted to be the property managers ourselves. Being outsiders to a new industry, you have to really accelerate your learning, and being on the ground effectively helping repair things at the house, talk to people that we're managing their houses for. that's how you accelerate your learning, and that's how you can build better product and hone your sales pitch and really get that nuance and understanding that only comes from years of experience in a very accelerated time frame. And so that's why we moved to Austin, and that's why we're still here today, is because we wanted to be co-located with our operations team. Operations, that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, you can have the best software in the world, but if your teams are not executing on the ground, that's like the ultimate like last mile aspect of this of property management, or whether it's for delivery. It's still a person to person product, or where you're dropping off food or you're repairing things at the house. You still need to have people that are doing it. And so that's where the operations is so critical, as part of this the product experience itself. Yeah, that's operations is everything at the end of the day. You can have the best sales pitch, you can have the flashiest product, but if you can't deliver, not only collect rent for your investors, but also make sure that your renters are happy, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So I'm like personally curious, because at one point I decided like, I'm going to invest in real estate. So I bought these like 3 investment properties in like the Midwest, super cheap. In hindsight, like terrible investments for a reason, right? And then I just had like terrible experience with like all of my property managers, like including ones that like would create like fake repairs and like straight up stole from me basically, right?
Sure.
So I feel like property management is one of those industries that's like, I don't know, it's like very difficult, right? To find good property management. So like, how are you guys going about that? Like, because you guys, I'm sure you guys have like a different approach than like kind of what, how the industry has historically been doing. So like, what is that differentiator, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's multiple levels. One is early on, we initially targeted the retail mom and pop investor. What we realized though is that the mom and pop investor still wanted to have the local property manager, texting relationship. They didn't really care about the product or the tech or the fact that we were in multiple cities and we had amazing reporting and amazing automation. It was the institutional investors that had multi-market, large scale, 10 to 20,000 single family portfolios across multiple states that wanted our platform. They were cobbling together, working with a bunch of different local PMs. And then now they could go to Darwin and have all their operations under one roof with a consistent set of operators, consistent set of reporting and KPIs and metrics. And so we had like extreme product market fit with the institutional crowd. And they actually treat this like an investment where their decisions are much more rational. You can understand like why they're making a decision. Whereas mom and pop investors, it can be very like hit or miss. Sometimes it's like they just moved out of a house. There's like an emotional attachment. So they don't want to make either they want to do too many investments or upgrades to a property, or they don't want to do any because they view it as their nest egg. So by just shifting our customer target, we could work with a much more, I would say, reasonable and rational set of people. And then our product just made sense for them where they could operate at scale. They appreciated what we had built, and we had solved the need very, very acutely for them. So that was really, really important. Now, our product, our data is best in class. We've built all our product, accounting, operational workflows, automation, AI, to really help drive visibility. And I would say like a lot of touch points on both the resident side and on the investor side. So it's all about like, how do you automate as much of these like back office functions as possible? That's why property management's so tough. There's a lot of touch points with vendors, repair vendors, with tenants that are complaining about certain things, paying rent, repairs and maintenance issues. And so if you can automate that with product and make sure they have a better experience at the end of the day, that's where tech and the experiences and outcomes for both the investors and the residents can all be aligned.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you guys actually started out kind of more thinking you were going to be B2C, and at some point you pivoted to now you're really more B2B then, right?
B2B, correct. This is like one of those B2B to C businesses. It is a multi-sided marketplace where we're working with large institutional investors, but we are also the face of the brand to the residents that are working with us.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And then obviously a couple of years ago, you guys got acquired, right? So congratulations on that, first of all.
Thanks.
What went into the decision to sell versus just continuing being a standalone company? Like, and was that like something you guys wanted to do? Was that something that was like a difficult decision, or kind of talk about that experience a little bit? Because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, like, they go into entrepreneurship, they start a business, and then the goal is to like eventually exit, right? So like, Was that the goal for you guys when you first started out, or it just kind of happened and it wasn't really, planned?
Yeah. So it just ended up being one of our potential clients. We were thinking about actually onboarding them as a client to manage their portfolio of homes. During that time, we were having that conversation. We were getting ready for our Series B raise, and we started seeing the market to turn slightly. We started seeing, especially on the single family investment side, KKR, these large institutional firms were beginning to pull back on buying new homes just because yields and interest rates were starting to increase. The trade just didn't make as much sense. And these are like the insights you get by being really close to your customers, being on the ground. These are things that our VC investors were not super clued into. They wanted us to go out and raise. When we did the acquisition, we were exceeding all our metrics for the year. So on paper, like our board materials, we were just crushing it. But we started seeing like things start to turn a little bit, and we're like, if the wave goes out, this is going to be a really difficult time to continue to operate going forward, especially if single family investment and investing kind of, stalls out for a period of time. And the other key learning before I tie this little thing I'm talking about is that in institutional property management for single family rentals, the people we were working with, they really care about stability. They really care about having, like, we are not just a startup, we have a solid balance sheet, because if they're going to load up just say $2 to $5 billion worth of assets onto our platform, and then, Costa doesn't invest any longer, that's going to be a big problem for them. And so it became more and more important during diligence sessions for some of these clients that they looked at our financials, they understood how much cash we had in our bank and the runway we had. And so having the backing of a public company became very, very attractive for us to help realize our mission and to continue going forward. So it just ended up happening that one of our potential clients, Pagaya, they had gotten into the single family space. They had a large portfolio of 2,000 to 4,000 homes. They were looking for a new property manager. We were looking potentially for a strategic acquisition, given what we were seeing, reading that between the tea leaves. And it ended up we had a conversation. They wanted us to join them. They had a tech background as well. It just ended up being like a perfect match. Opportune moment, opportune time. And it actually moved very quickly through the discussions. Instead of just taking them on as a commercial client, we became part of their company.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense, because thinking about it, you guys, like, your product must be super sticky for your customers, because once they onboard with you and you're managing whatever thousands of units for them, like if you go out of business, or if they for whatever reason decide to churn, now they're gonna have to go piecemeal together all the property management again across country, which would be a freaking nightmare, right?
That's right. It's not as simple, moving different property managers is not a simple task. It takes 3 to 6 months. There's a lot of paperwork. They have to get approval from their lenders to actually change who's actually property managing their homes. And so they want to do it once, and they want to never do it again. And so there's extensive diligence, and taking a bet not only on transitioning to a new property manager, but then taking a bet on a startup. Those are just very difficult things for a institutional investment manager to commit to. And it's one of the reasons why breaking into real estate is so challenging, because you have so many barriers and a lot of friction points to get these things through. Switching costs are very, very high. So it just ended up being the perfect match. Like when we got acquired by Pagaya, our sales pipeline and our ability to convert really jumped up materially. And the partnership and being a subsidiary of a publicly backed company where all the financials are public, and we can just say, look at the cash that we have in bank here. It just made it a non-discussion point, and we could just focus on our product and our operations and why we're the best. And so we've run the table for the past 2.5 years because of this. So it's been a very really, really important strategic move that's benefited Darwin immensely.
Revenue synergies, baby.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Just one or two more questions. I know we're almost out of time, but I guess to come full circle then, because we kind of talked about all the different things you've done along the way. You started out on Wall Street, right? Like, how was your Wall Street background, whether it's, I don't know, hard skills or soft skills that you gained? Like, how has that given you an edge as a founder now that, maybe you didn't fully appreciate until you were like deep in it?
Yeah, I think, and this goes for other aspects outside of just like finance, but also LinkedIn and whatnot. I think developing a hybrid set of skills really allows you as a founder, as a leader within any company, to be able to have like the breadth of knowledge to jump into any conversation and to understand what's getting talked about. I can interact with the finance people, the accounting teams, the data teams, the product teams, and whatnot. And that's immensely valuable, especially in an early stage company where you do have to be a jack of all trades. Now, eventually you do have to specialize, but I still build models, whether it is for product, whether it is for finance, and understanding the cash flows of the business. Being able to just model and understand the levers of something, like I said, it could be a product or it could be the financials of the business, is really, really important. And being able to understand these are the three most sensitive aspects of this business that I need to be able to tweak and adjust, and it gives you absolute clarity of knowing what the key things that you have to focus on are. And so I think modeling is just like this. It drives a lot of clarity, a lot of distillation of like, what are the things that are most important that you should care about? And so that's probably one of the key aspects that I've taken from my like 2 years of banking and then, private equity, all the way through every aspect of my career. Is like, I open up Excel or Google Sheets now more often than not. And I try to recreate the world in Excel so I can do sensitivity analysis and really understand what's going to drive growth, what's going to drive engagement, what's going to drive the financials and profitability of this business going forward.
Yeah. And I guess when I think about all the roles you've had along the way, they've all been like highly analytical roles, right?
Correct.
And so I'm guessing having that kind of analytical foundation from your early days allows you to kind of build on top of that. And obviously, the type of analysis you were doing after banking, I will argue, is like much more complex and much more advanced. But I think I can't really think of too many other jobs as that would have been like a better kind of initial training ground.
Exactly. It's everything. I see other people who try to model that don't have banking backgrounds. And they struggle to like break down the components of the business. The models are not well structured. They're not easy to, there's a lot of hard codes. And you're like, I just want to run a sensitivity analysis. Crap. Now I have to rebuild everything from scratch. And so those skill sets are really, really valuable, because when you jump into a board meeting or you go to a VC pitch or any other situation, people want to understand, like, if I give you an incremental dollar, what is the output of that going to be? And you need to be able to understand that. And you typically do that through the form of a model, right? Whether it's right or wrong, that's less important than understanding the key levers of the business and which levers are going to drive a disproportionate impact versus the ones that are going to drive less impact. And you can actually have productive conversations through the framework of a model versus just discussing, hand wavy terms or just like shooting from the hip. And so it's really helped me understand like what's most important to work on, along with like providing more structure for the rest of the company to operate in.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome, man. Last question that I always end on.
Yeah.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, let's say you're still in college or something, what would you say?
That's a good one. I think in general, like, I'm still embracing this advice to this day, but I think I always try to find the way to win, and like I want to understand like the rules that I have to play by to win, whether it is at a company or a new startup idea or whatnot. And in so many ways, developing hybrid skills allows me to be able to be involved in more things, to provide more value in more conversations, and to drive more leverage for a broader set of people across the board. And it's honestly like how I've made myself, I believe, more invaluable to the teams I work in, is developing all these complementary but different skill sets along the way. So I have the breadth of knowledge, but I can go very, very deep in multiple areas. Previously, it used to just be finance. Now it's data, and it's product and marketing and sales. And so just being able to make yourself invaluable, understand like the rules on the field. And in so many ways, startups, like, you have to have that breadth of knowledge, but depth of knowledge at the same time. That's the advice I would have given myself back then. Maybe I would have done more on like learning data skills earlier on. But I think it's something I still embrace to this very day, is like hybrid skill sets, going super deep, but going wide at the same time, and trying to find ways to drive value to as many different people within the company as possible.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said earlier, you can tell this is really what you live by, which is always optimizing for learning.
Yep.
And if you're going to learn, then try to learn from the best.
Correct.
Right. And so whether that's like joining the best companies or the best teams, there's honestly, I think there's a big difference in, sure, you can learn from a lot of different places or a lot of different people, but like learning from the best versus learning from like the second best or the third best, a lot of times it's like, it's actually a big difference.
Massive gap. Yep.
Yeah. And it's obviously easier said than done, because to learn from the best, they have to also want to hire you. But you know,
That's
as
right.
long as you continue to build on yourself and build your skill set and just kind of try to go for the best opportunities you can find, then I think in the long term it'll work out pretty well, right?
Definitely.
Awesome, man, dude. This was honestly a great interview. I really enjoyed it, and man, you've done a lot of amazing things.
Appreciate
I'm
it, Sam.
super impressed. Not that I wasn't before. I always knew you were a super sharp guy, but to see what you've accomplished even after our MS days is like it's just really awesome. So
Appreciate it.
appreciate you being on here and
Yep.
sharing your story. And I think our audience definitely, they'll take a lot away from this. And so yeah, just grateful for you coming on. And I hope we get to do this again sometime soon.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. And
Thanks,
thanks a lot,
Sam.
Zach. Talk soon.
Bye.
I see you.